And friends, welcome. My name is Stephen Fetter, and I work at the General Counsel office. I manage the online learning program for the General Counsel called United in Learning. And I'm delighted to be here with you today and to be connecting with you from coast to coast. We've got people in Vancouver and people in PEI and folks all across the country. So welcome. We've had weather reports from across the country, and it's just fun to connect this way. So thank you for being a part of this. Wanted to invite Lynn and Alan to introduce yourselves, to tell us where you're sitting and what brings you into this, and we'll begin. Before I do that, Tina, we're going to invite you to have your camera off, if you please. We'll leave the cameras off for our program because it's distracting to see people who aren't really talking. Thank you. We are recording this program, and so the recording will be available afterwards. So, Lynn, why don't you introduce yourself first? Glad to have you here.
Okay, my name is Lynn, and actually I'm going to tell a little bit about my story later, but I'm a part-time minister at Bethany Pontypool Pastoral Charge and part-time at Bedford House Community Ministry here. And yeah, I'm telling a bit of my story later, so.
Right, and okay. I'm Alan Smith-Reeve. I also work part-time in a congregation, Greenwood United, and then I work with Lynn here at the Bedford House Community Ministry. You can see a picture of where we're sitting. There's a little more snow today around Bedford House. But yeah, we're really excited to have this opportunity to share this experiment that's in ministry and bridging poverty and privilege, we call it in our bridging team. So we wanted to ask who's with us, if we could get a sense of who's with us, and if you could use your raise hands. First of all, we're wondering how many folks are in a rural setting. Could you raise your hand?
Oh, do you know what? If you use the yes and no buttons instead of raising your hand, then it gives me a number, which might be easier.
Oh, okay.
So if people put their hand up, then I don't get a number.
Okay.
And then I have to count them. Now I can run out of fingers and toes pretty fast.
Okay, put your hands down. Instead.
So,
okay, so it doesn't.
So I'm seeing 8 rural.
Up at the top, but so
okay.
What have you got?
So then, can we assume that everyone else is in an urban setting?
Let's clear those and say if you're in an urban setting, press yes. Oh, it's like election night. So I've got 15 yeses there.
Okay. Okay. So our next question is about, we know that Jordan Sullivan has invited many folks from the community ministries of the United Church, but we thought, so if you're in a community ministry setting as opposed to a congregation, would you say yes to community ministry? So then
a couple of them. I'm seeing 2.
Yeah. Okay. So then can we assume that others are in a congregation setting? No, we have somebody at the door.
You should stop ordering from Amazon, you know.
So, and if you're in, one more question, if you're in a congregation, how many of you would say have a food bank or a program serving low-income folks in your neighborhood, in your setting?
Oh, there's a handful of them. There are quite a few. 15, 16, 18.
Great.
Very good. Carol, we're going to invite the people to turn their cameras off, if you please, so that we just have cameras on for the speakers. Thanks. Okay, 19 food banks. That's impressive.
We had one of the webinar participants knock on the door.
Oh, is that how it works? I love it. Gee, I didn't have that privilege. It would be too
You're
far
welcome.
to drive.
And one last question. How many folks would have heard of Bridges Out of Poverty prior to this webinar, if you would say yes?
Okay, 12, 13. So about a third of our group had heard about it before.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks very much. We'll have more questions for you as we go. A little bit of background. Well, we're going to talk about one of the reasons we've arrived here it's been a long journey, and it goes back into as a part of Lynn's story. Storytelling is key to everything we're doing, so we thought we'd start with some of Lynn's story.
Okay, if you can't hear me well, then raise your hand, because we're getting Alan's computer to pick up the sound here.
Yep. You sounded good to me.
Annette can't hear me?
It sounds good from this end.
Okay. Anyways, so I ended up 17 years on social assistance, but I did not grow up in poverty. That I was in what would be like a 3-generation transition. My grandparents lived north of Peterborough and well into the country, and neither of my parents had a high school education, but they ended up having a very successful business, and at the end owned quite a big property of their own, and after they retired. So one question I'd like to get you all thinking is, knowing that my parents did not have a high school education, they had grown up very, very rural, and now they've had a successful business. Would there have been a push in our house for me to go and get an education? And you can do a yes or a no vote. Do you think they would have pushed me to get an education? I can see some of the names.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
we got
some parents in that situation would definitely have pushed me to get an education, but my parents did not. They were not opposed to it at all, but there wasn't the push to get an education. And I believe that's because their experience was, you don't need an education to be successful in life. And so I didn't have that push. And I believe that's partly of also the cultural difference between low income and middle class, that if your grandparents were educated or if your parents were educated, then you're on this stream to, you'll be educated to be successful in life. But anyway, so I got married fairly young, and in the mid-90s, my husband was going to university, wanted to be a professor of religious studies. We had 5 kids, as you can see up there. And then all of a sudden his health bottomed. He'd been struggling for a number of years with chronic pancreatitis. And then that led to diabetes, and eventually to one leg being amputated, 11 months later, the other leg being amputated, and then in long-term care when he was 52 years old, and then he passed away. And so I lived in a very small world, and we were living on Ontario Disability Support Program. We home educated the kids, and as he became increasingly ill, I was the caregiver at home. So then it was for 17 years that we lived on Ontario Disability Support Program. And in around 2007 or 2008, we were a little bit burnt out on church and struggled because of his health in part. But we ended up invited to a small group that was run out of Royal United Church. And so we went to that group, and within the group, it was all retired folks and old enough to be our parents. But the thing that they could connect with was health issues, which a lot of people our age couldn't connect with. But it was challenging then because these are mostly retired professionals. And so their conversations would still revolve around trips that we couldn't relate to, or sometimes meals at restaurants, things like that. But we certainly felt loved and accepted by them, and that which was really cool. But then when it became obvious that he was going to long-term care, I realized one day that the money would stop the day he went in. The kids were grown by then, and Ontario Disability Support Program was supporting him, and every 6 months or something I had to have a doctor saying that yes, I had to stay home and care for him. And so I realized when he went into long-term care, all of a sudden I have no income, I have no way to live.
Wow.
So I was a saver and a budgeter, and I think that really helped us. And a lot of people don't have that skill. I had that skill, but still can't save a lot on Ontario Disability Support Program. And then some friends who realized what we were trying to navigate gifted me with $1,000. So when I went to Ontario Works and said, what are you going to do for me? How are you going to help me? She said, well, how much money do you have in the bank? And when I told her, she said, well, no, we can't help you. You have to have less than $600.
Good Lord.
We can do anything. So I thought they would give me retraining, maybe, continue like healthcare or whatever. I needed that kind of stuff, supports, but no, nothing at all. So I was in a bit of a panic, and the minister at my church, he suggested that I pull together people I trusted and friends from the congregation. And so I did. One was a retired teacher, one was a retired principal, someone else had their own small business, and there was someone else who was really good at, strategizing and such. So we got a big piece of paper and put it on the table, and they began to ask me questions about, Lynn, what is it you're passionate about? What do you need to do? And so I had a passion around children and I had a passion around education and church. Like I had been so involved all my life, and I felt called to ministry, but I had begun to believe that I was that was my ministry, doing what I could. So that all led to the discernment process, and then to the Center for Christian Studies with Diaconal Ministry. And so that was interesting because once I got there, it's still about small groups supporting people. We had to have a small group around us. And because of the Pathways process, there was another small group. So I was always surrounded by these small groups of people to support me in my journey and help me figure this thing out, because I had made this cultural shift that I didn't really have words for, but they were there to support me. And when I get frustrated, they would be able to encourage me in certain ways. So what did I miss?
Well, so by that time we were in Peterborough. Lynn and I had started a relationship. We had moved to Peterborough, and three things happened in 2014. The United Church put out a call for new ministry proposals. And so we responded with a proposal around a faith-based community development learning center called Bedford House, in this house that we've been able to buy, that has a large 14 by 28 living room space, good enough for 12 to 20 people maybe. And the other thing that happened, by chance, we were invited to a day-long workshop for bridges out of poverty.
Yeah, so that was, for me, sitting in that room, all of these light bulbs kept going off for me, because here I am from this culture, if you would, of low-income poverty, and I've been now transplanted into a culture of middle class, where I'm working in a middle class environment. I'm married into a middle class family, and They are all weird. I didn't realize that I was experiencing all these cultural differences, and some stuff just didn't make any sense to me at all, or I'd be offended at this or that, or I think I offended people and had no clue that that's what was going on till I was in that room and the woman was telling stories and making this all make sense. And it was such a powerful thing. It had such an impact on my life, our lives, that we could never get rid of the thought.
Yeah. So while Lynn continued to research and train and get further training in Bridges Out of Poverty, at Bedford House, we experimented with a bunch of different small group learning circles. Here's a list of some of the experiments we did for the first 3 years. But in 2017, we started our first bridging team, really based on that experience that Lynn had of surrounding under-resourced or low-income folks with mentors. So that's when we started experimenting with bridging teams.
Okay, so in part in my studies for the Center for Christian Studies, I love learning, and I got to take all these amazing courses, and one was on Romans. And so during that, and I would be reading all this stuff to Alan that listen to this. So when I was studying about the Roman house churches, and that they were always small groups because the houses were small, but they were all these different economic strata, is that the right word? See, I'm still of people that met together. And so we have slaves who have no control over their lives at all, or very little control, but they now are allowed to be part of this house church where they are treated with honor and respect, which was incredible. And then they would eat together. That's our communion meal. They would eat, and the richer people, the people who are more stable life, would bring meat to the table, and that was the opportunity for the poorest among them to be able to eat well. And so this concept of a group that met, Christians, and motivated by leveling the playing field at some level. Right.
So all of that was cooking in the background. So today we want to take you through a process of, we want to give you the theory behind what we're up to. We'll tell you the action, how we've applied it, and then before our time is up, is do some reflecting with you. So the theory we're going to start with is just give you a taste of this Bridges Out of Poverty framework for understanding poverty. Then we're going to tell you how we've applied it in Peterborough with our bridging teams model. And then we're to end with, we invite you to reflect with us around changing the conversation. So
this all began with Dr. Ruby Payne. And you can Google her and find out information about her, maybe watch some videos where she's talking. She had married into another class, and a socioeconomic class, and then their work later took them, well, she married someone from situational poverty who lived in an area where there were a lot of generational poverty folks, and then in their working life, they ended up rubbing shoulders with very wealthy people. And so she was an educator, and she just absorbed, I guess, an understanding of how people function differently. So she was
a school teacher, right? Yeah. A public school teacher, and she started noticing different behaviors from children from different economic classes. And this turned into a doctoral thesis for her, as other teachers were coming to her and asking her, what are you doing differently that we're not doing?
Yeah, or they wouldn't understand, why is this kid acting this way? And she would say, oh, well, of course, that makes sense because of ... So she wrote a book called Framework for Understanding Poverty. And then Phil Duvall was given a copy of her book, read it, and said, we need this for the social service sector. And that's how Bridges Out of Poverty was put together.
So it's now developed into AHA Process Inc. And this is a company in the States You can Google it, and what you'll find there is they now sell all kinds of books and training and webinars all around the Bridges Out of Poverty philosophy and framework. Here's another example, a study that she did aimed for church people.
Yeah.
Right. Is being applied in over 370 communities across North America. It's in about a dozen. It's in Ontario now. It's spread. There's some. It's being picked up in Europe as well. So in every community, people take this framework and apply it differently. And there's all kinds of different experiments. Again, if you go on YouTube, you'll find different stories from different places. But in Peterborough Social Services has been training agency staff, and they've managed to transform even the way they treat their clients from it's a client-centered focus. And so training social workers, who are mostly middle-class folks, about this different culture that they're dealing with, and giving them a new way of understanding what their clients are going through.
When I used to go into the Ontario Disability Support Office in the area we lived in, there'd be this brick wall and this little glass window that the receptionist is behind, and this like very, these white hard chairs to sit in. And so now, if you go over to the Ontario Works office here in Peterborough, it's all different. I mean, I didn't go to that office, but it's this, because they have really embraced this philosophy. You go in there, it's a very pleasant looking room to sit in. There's a TV screen up there, a low counter with a woman sitting behind.
Plexiglass is gone.
Yeah, to receive. And if someone has an emergency, it's looked after right away. They don't say, okay, we'll make an appointment with your worker and in 3 days. So it's really...
There's a children's play area there.
Yes, it's so different. And I love this because it's like you're the expert in your own life. You, not me, even though I think I know everything, you are, and also that treats people with respect and honor, and that's very powerful to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like any philosophy, it can be critiqued, and people will sometimes say, are we trying to turn poor people into middle-class people? But it fits with our United Church empowerment values and ways of working, putting low-income folks at the center of the solution. The other piece that we really like is that it's not just about money. Poverty is defined by a lack of resources, a lack of the 11 essential resources. And so it takes a much more holistic look at what poverty is, and even wealthy people can lack resources, some resources, which we'll get into that a bit more. So, but that bottom bullet, relationships and trust building, are at the heart of this community approach. So that's what we're about. So there's 4 key concepts that we wanted to just quickly go through with you: the hidden roles of socioeconomic class, the 11 essential resources, 4 causes of poverty, and 4 ways people manage to escape poverty. This is a 2-day workshop, so we're just trying to give you a little taste of it.
Ruby has written another book called Crossing the Tracks for Love, What to Do When You and Your Partner Grew Up in Different Worlds. And there's just a little a page here we'd like to read to you. You have just received a call from your mother that your brother is in jail for driving under the influence. She's crying and she begs you to do something. So you leave work telling the boss that you're going to be with a sick child. This is the second time this week that you've left work for a family crisis. You take the rent money you've saved and go to the bail bondsman to get your brother out of jail. On the way home, because he's so depressed, you stop and buy him a 6-pack of beer.
Here's the next scenario. You have just received a call from your mother. Your brother is in jail for driving under the influence. She is crying and begs you to do something. You calmly tell her that you cannot leave work and that your brother will have to wait until 6 o'clock that evening. You take some money out of your savings account to get him out of jail and tell him this is it. You will not help him again. You then make arrangements for him to get professional help through his workplace employee assistance program. Can you guess which class we're talking about in each of these? There's one more.
You've just received a call from your mother that your brother is in jail for driving under the influence. He's crying and begs you to do something. So you call the family lawyer and have him post bail for your brother. The judge is a personal friend of yours. You arrange to have your brother checked into a detox facility, and he's given 100 hours of community service. You're particularly concerned about the publicity around this issue, so you have all of this arranged very discreetly. Comments. The name of the book is Crossing the Tracks for Love.
So again, stories, right? And it's the stories that reveals the different resources that the different cultures or classes are able to access. So, and this little chart that we have up on the screen, you can apply it, you know, in so many different ways, right? Hidden rules. What are some hidden rules?
Well, in Canada, there's a hidden rule. Probably most countries, about which way you face when you get in an elevator. Which way do you face when you get in an elevator?
Right.
People can respond.
Sure. So put a note in the chat then, folks. Which way do you face when you get in an elevator?
Right. Yeah. Hidden rules. You come into somebody's home in the middle of winter. Do you take off your shoes?
Well, I have a hidden rule that please do not wear your boots in my house in the winter, but I don't have that posted anywhere, but it's my hidden rule. If you walk through my house with your boots on, it will offend me.
Right.
And in churches, we have lots of hidden rules in churches. Can anybody think of some hidden rules in churches, in your churches? They're not posted. Yes, and bring slippers. That's for wearing boots in my house.
So hidden rules. If I'm a stranger and I come in your church, yeah, who sits where?
Don't sit in my pew.
Coffee cups have to be lined up the right way. Okay.
I'm feeling we get a few of these.
Do you have to give them off? If you arrive late, sit at the back. Don't use too much butter in the sandwiches. No Timmies in the sanctuary.
No things. Yeah, yeah.
Where you sit and don't give small children crayons near hymnals.
Yeah, yeah. I think you get the idea. Keep them coming, but we'll keep going. This is a graphic Lynn created to talk about the 11 essential resources.
Right. So when we're talking about the 11, poverty, as Alan said, is the extent to which an individual does without resources. So if you think about my life in poverty, then it's easy to look at it this way, that there weren't the role models. As we came to the United Church, then we began to develop role models, but we didn't have a lot of role models. We didn't have social capital, certainly no financial health. Physical health was really poor. Purpose, I think that was a bit higher for us. Mental health is about your ability to learn, which was high for us, but emotional health was, oh my goodness, it would depend on the day. Almost no, you could say no understanding of the hidden rules of middle class culture, or, you know, the middle income, the dominant culture. And language, we were pretty good because we were all book readers and everything. But years later, when I met Alan's family and one of his nieces, who was 12 at the time, and she was the daughter of professionals, and I was sat silent amazement that she had access to language I did not have at all. And I think, again, that circle, me being part of that circle was really helpful to me. Our reputation, that's about our ability to, like our credit rating, things like that.
Who do you know? Who can give you a reference for a landlord? Who can give you a reference for a job? Yeah, it's tied in with that whole social capital.
And perseverance. That's how you deal with circumstances. But as you can see, anybody who's living with all those resources so low, it's called the tyranny of the moment. You're just focusing on the next crisis. And can I get through to the end of this week? Can we, get what we need to get? So the stress of always looking like down, really, in a sense.
Right. For those of you in community ministry or working in agencies, agencies can also experience that tyranny of the moment, grant to grant, hard to plan, long-term plan when you don't know if you're going to meet this year's budget.
Can't churches?
Churches? Compared with, if you have all of those resources in place, you're able to get a long-term view of things and able to set goals, right? If you have each of those resources in place.
And also, if most of your resources are very strong, if one dips, you have more access to help to bring it back up again.
That's right.
So if we can go back to the other one. So while we were living in poverty on Ontario Disability Support Program, my father passed away, left me an inheritance, which got hung up and didn't come to me till years later. But looking at that now, and I'm picking a number, say $80,000 was my inheritance, and it had come to us when we were living in this, would that $80,000, and I'm looking for people to answer, would that have had the power to change our lives? So I don't know, is a yes, no? I guess yes and no. You can just hit the button, yes or no. Would the $80,000 have had the power to change our lives, to get us out of poverty?
We're using the status icons again, folks. It's pretty evenly split. The no's are starting to take off here. So
okay.
I'm seeing probably twice as many no's as yeses. Okay.
So, I mean, like, unless you made the journey, how would you know the answer? But in our situation then, especially for someone on ODSP, at that time, the rules have changed slightly, but at that time, we would have been totally cut off of Ontario Disability Support Program. And actually, if it happened today, we would have been cut off as well. You're only allowed to, like 40,000 is their cutoff if you sold a house or anything, or came into money like that. But they would have cut us off of ODSP. So, okay, all of a sudden we have $80,000. I don't know how many years you all can live on $80,000. But at that time, I think we were living on about $20,000 a year. So that would have given us 4 years. We wouldn't have been able, if you think it through, we wouldn't have been able to buy a house because houses cost more than that. And the bank's not going to lend us any money because nobody has a job. So that's one reason you see that for folks just dumping a pile of money, and I don't mean like the basic income is brilliant. So it's not that kind of thing, but dumping a pile of money on somebody without helping them build the other resources isn't necessarily the answer.
Right. Whereas basic income, could provide that base where people can begin to build their other resources.
Exactly.
Right.
So then when we hit this period of my life, we're together, the inheritance comes, we buy a house. And we're able to because all the other resources were at a level of stability.
Yeah. We're going to just skip through. Here's these next two slides list the 11 resources in a little more detail. We're going to just skip through these. You can refer back when you get the slide deck. But we thought we'd do, like when you actually do the workshop, it's much more interactive, and there's small groups, and you work together around some of these questions. So Stephen set up a little poll for us. There's actually 3 different polls. Could you survive in poverty? Could you survive in middle class? Could you survive in wealth? So we're going to invite you just to do the poverty poll. If you want to answer the 10 questions and then submit it.
Sure, so that should be up on your screen now, friends. And, feel free to click through the answers and see how many yeses you
We know that.
you see. Are you seeing it? I hope you are.
Grocery stores and garbage bins throw access for throwaway food. Yeah, you got me on that one. Yeah, you're good. I know how to get someone out of jail. Yeah, I don't. Oh yeah. Know how to.
I love some of these questions. They're. Know
how to get a gun.
I need to say, even typing up this poll made me realize how little I know about living this way.
Where the laundromats are. Can get by without a car. No. All right. Know what to do when I don't have money to pay the bills.
Yeah, bank mom and dad died years ago.
I know how to move in half a day.
Oh, I moved my kids.
Yeah, okay. I can entertain a group of families with my personality and stories.
That's my husband's job.
Okay.
So 35 people have got through to the end. When you've got all the way down to the end and clicked submit, then we need you to collect all the yeses. Figure out how many yeses you clicked.
Oops, we didn't count. Oh well.
We got maybe half of them.
You wrote this. You're supposed to know how it works. Oh, the survey disappears, Daryl. Sorry about that. We should have warned you ahead of time then.
Yeah, when we submitted, that's what happened to us.
Whoops. Barbara, if the submit button isn't working, it may be because you haven't answered all the questions. The program is stupid. It won't let you miss one. Stupid or smart, I don't know which. That's okay. You get the idea anyway, Alma, even if you didn't do the counting. You know what? This is not a legal poll. We don't need it for to elect members to general council or something. So if you can't get it, if it doesn't quite work for you, like, don't panic. It's supposed to be mostly fun. James, over on the right, very right of my screen, there's a scroll bar. So I just move my mouse over to it and scroll up and down. Well, as I say, don't panic. Computers are powerful and not perfect. They're part of the principalities and powers, right? We have 44 people who are finished out of 51. Do you want me to close the polling and we can see what the final results were?
Great.
Okay, here we go. So I'll share the results. There's collectively how we sit on this.
Okay, so people are pretty good with the churches. Grocery stores and garbage bins, not so much. I know how to get someone out of jail.
I wouldn't have a clue.
Know how to physically fight and defend myself. Guns don't seem to be
Good Lord.
all that ready. Laundromats, better. I can get by without a car. 50-50 on the what to do when I don't have money. So in the I guess any other comments? What are your observations?
Yeah, put your comments in the chat. That's a good idea. What did you think about as you were doing this? What did you notice about yourself? Pat says, I am middle class. Yeah, me too. Holy cow.
Jordan said, so many privileges I take for granted.
Yes.
So there's a lot here to unpack, and also when you do the poll for middle class and wealth, you get the sense of, that there really are different rules, different skill sets needed in each culture.
Mm-hmm.
We try to, screen out the judgment in each, and just understand that each culture has its own set of skills. There's challenges and difficulties in each of the three. But especially, I think what is an aha for a lot of folks is how much skill and expertise it takes to survive in poverty. Did we have the summary?
Oh, hang on just a second. There you go.
I like
So,
the summary.
Yeah, so in the summary, if you can put yourself if you can remember.
I definitely depend on my college degree. I would be sunk.
I think we were about 50-50 here. But yeah, how challenging it can be, and how skilled you need to be.
We forget that. We look at the people who are poor and we think that they are somehow less skilled than us. They're skilled at different things, but it takes an enormous amount of skill to live that way.
Right, right. Have people had experiences where you've been found yourself in a different culture than your own and felt like a fish out of water?
I was an intern in the Philippines, and I can remember the first couple of weeks walking around there realizing I was getting totally lost because I could not figure out what the landmarks were. Right. Everything looked the same. I couldn't figure out what was common and what was unusual, and I would get lost walking 2 blocks from home.
Right, right. So a lot of us have had that kind of cross-cultural experience, but we haven't necessarily said here in our own country, we can experience those cross-cultural challenges, right? So
there's the results of the people who could remember how many yeses they clicked. And
right.
The biggest percentage of people were in the middle.
Okay.
There's a classic bell curve if you ever saw one.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
So friends, you can close that poll window if you like. Just click the X to close it and get it out of the way and off your screen if you want to.
So just to wrap up, there's, again, the workshop engages people to brainstorm around the 4 causes of poverty. And when we do that, typically what happens is people name that first category of personal issues like, addictions, problems with the law, lack of education. So we tend to personalize, individualize it, and think people are in poverty because of their individual issues, racism, etc. What comes out, though, as we begin to brainstorm is the social issues. Here in Peterborough, we have factories shutting down, lack of jobs, lack of housing, lack of resources. The third category is around exploitation. And that's where we look. That chart we have down is, what do we call those? The rent to own stores, how exploitive they can be, right? And you can see the chart shows how much you end up paying with no money down. Another good example are money marts, right?
Yeah, so here's a question for you all. What do you think is the legal allowable interest to charge someone on a loan?
At a money mart.
At a money mart, yeah, well, so what's the legal limit in Ontario? I don't know if it's
any guesses?
Canada-wide.
Yeah, this might be different. 35, 50, 20s, 30s. Yeah.
About 60%. It's at, yeah, there's some more coming in too much.
Yeah.
Guessing 40%, 68. It's, I believe it's 59% is the legal limit in Ontario. Again, I don't know if it's Canada-wide, but like those are the folks, the low-income folks who can't get money. Their car breaks down. They need $200 to fix the car, and they can't get it anywhere else. That's where they have to go. And yes, I do agree. It should be illegal.
Right.
It's so wrong.
Yeah. So in this category, we also get to start talking about employers who will only offer part-time employment without benefits, you know, Walmart, for example. So corporate exploitation as well is in this this category. What do we call them? What's the predators?
Predators.
Yeah,
yes.
corporate predators. And then, of course, the last category is around where we start looking at government policies, everything from free trade, international free trade, to you know, social assistance policies. Right here in Ontario, social assistance rates haven't gone up since the 90s. Right, where they were actually reduced with Mike Harrison. Since then, they haven't raised. Anyone noticed?
In a significant
Yeah, has anyone noticed how much inflation has gone up since the 90s, right? And social assistance. So those kinds of government policies. So again, we're just kind of skipping over that. And finally, 4 ways to escape poverty. That first one, no significant change occurs without a significant relationship. So that's what really struck us. And that's the foundation of our work with bridging teams. Just before we leave, so that's the first section, the overview of the Bridges Out of Poverty training. What are your takeaways? Could you give us your comments in the chats, anything that strikes you, that jumps out at you? Anything that's new or surprising or shocking there?
I think we have said before, but it's also, we're talking for the most part about generational poverty, which is 2 or more generations in poverty, or generational middle class, generational wealth. And I say mega wealth because that's the 1%. So, and there are generalizations and patterns that you see. And so even the thing about relationships is so important to people in low income because they don't have money to get it, you know, to access childcare. So it's a neighbor, you know, it's, I don't have CAA, my car breaks down, it's a neighbor. So how relationships are so important.
So, and finally, or just we're curious, we thought we'd take this opportunity to do a little survey with you. Is this kind of a training, that workshop that goes through this philosophy, is that something you might be interested in doing in this kind of a format, an online webinar format? I mean, you can access it through AHA Process, but is that something that we might be able to offer to you? If so, if you'd like to put your contact information in the chat.
So that's, you know what, that's a breach of privacy, Ellen. So
of course,
probably can't do that, but yeah, send me an email. Maybe that's the quick way, and I'll pass them on to, I'll
send an email.
Send them on to Ellen and Lynn.
Yeah, how about just for our purposes today, could we get a yes, no?
Sure, that would help, and then we'll know whether or not there's a critical mass, and we could go ahead and organize one.
Yeah.
Also, we should just go through these comments.
Yeah, there's a handful of people there. There's what, 10, 12? Yep, sure.
Okay, interesting.
What's the cost? Oh, the cost there is 45 or 25. Yeah, that's reasonable.
Yeah, so the workbook is $25, and so and then when we charge 45, we include a lunch. So I think that would be challenging to do in a webinar. Have you ever done that, Stephen?
Only when people bring their own. It's sort of the loaves and fishes process, right?
Right.
Skip the dishes. There we go.
So yeah, so logistically, we might be able to set something like that up and figure out how to get people the workbooks and so on.
Yeah.
So
I would say too, if we're doing that, somebody's saying the group needs to be small. Zoom will allow us to do breakout sessions. So
okay.
if your agenda includes breakout groups and discussion and then feedback and so on, we can do that. We didn't do it for today, but it's certainly something we could pursue. And Hillary, yes, absolutely, we're recording this. The slides will be there and available within a few days. It takes me a while just to finish, put the recording together and get everything posted. I'll send out an email when it's all ready.
Okay. Okay.
There are a few questions in the comments, so should we
Some
look
questions
at them
there?
quickly? I don't know how far to
Can
go.
you tell us how this learning has affected how you live your ministry at Bedford House? What do you do differently than you would have done before the learning?
It's a constant learning. Like it changes. Lynn and I are constantly pointing out our different attitudes, our different ways of seeing the world, our different ways of approaching purchasing and so on. So it's been fascinating in our own relationship in the churches. Yeah.
I give a little example. So within this Bridges Out of Poverty, they talk about one of the tools. Not everybody has the same tools, but one of the tools in the toolbox of a person who's grown up in poverty is using humor to diffuse a situation. And so a couple different people we've worked with use humor a lot. And I mean that it's not that it's only reserved for diffusing a situation, but use humor a lot. And that within the training, it's like, appreciate the humor. This is a tool in their toolbox to use humor. And so sometimes the humor isn't particularly appropriate. Not that, and I don't mean that it's rude humor or anything, it's just not really appropriate, but it's that appreciate that person is pulling out one of their tools and using it. But you can think about when a person who's grown up in poverty with this tool in their toolbox, they get in this situation, say it's a young man, he gets pulled over by the cops and he tries to joke with the cop because he's using his tool of humor. But the cop doesn't sees this kid that is smart mouthing him or whatever and doesn't have appreciation that he's just trying to diffuse the situation. And so how there can be misunderstandings that way. So I think that's part of it. Just stop for a second. And I do believe that a lot of times when we're offended, it's because someone's broken a hidden rule we have. So just stop for a second. What's the hidden rule that I have? Why would have they broken it? Or, I don't have a sign posted. How would they know this? Or, and that's true of anybody. It's not just low income, but it's true of anybody. So just sensitizes us to a lot of things like that.
So yeah. There's so many stories, too many to tell, right? And we're collecting them as we go. And it's every bridging team, something else pops out, and it's great to see when the group comes together and starts noticing among themselves. Oh, that's a very middle class thing of you to say, or etc. So now we want to tell you about how we've applied this Bridges Out of Poverty framework in our own bridging team work. So it's a simple recipe, right? Do you want to talk?
A simple recipe. So we experiment on people. We invited some people who are on social assistance, invited them to take part in this experiment. There were 5 under-resourced people who did so. We call them catalysts now. And then there were 10 resourced or middle-income earners who were retired, who we knew and invited them to this experiment as well. And there were 2 co-facilitators. We met weekly for a learning circle. And as Alan says, we stirred in food, fun, and storytelling.
And
it was magic.
Watch the magic happen.
Magic.
Yeah. So we did that initially at Trinity United Church in downtown Peterborough. and it was amazing. So out of that, Lynn and I trained one of the under-resourced people, and actually a Fleming College student, and they are now leading the second experiment, the second group. And so we've got, the process involves like these weekly gatherings around the food. Initially, we do 3 orientation sessions. We talk about boundaries. We talk about, what's important. Is this for you? It's a bit of a screening process because it's not for everyone. We need to say that. Like, this is not a program that would work for someone who is homeless or someone who is in a mental health crisis. They need to have a certain amount of stability in their lives to really be able to, be able to commit to a weekly gathering, and a certain amount of literacy to be able to go through the workbook, even though it's aimed at, maybe a high school graduation, graduate literacy level. So it's not for everyone. So that orientation is a bit of a screening process. And then we work through that Getting Ahead workbook. And that's about 5 months of meetings. And then there's the next commitment is whether the team wants to continue meeting. And so far in both groups, they've been excited to keep going. Yes, let's keep going. And that's where the relationships and the storytelling and a real bond begins to develop. And then at the end of that, the question is, the facilitators pull out. The group has gradually been taking over and running the group. That's part of the training. So they're looking after the lunches, they're looking after the organizing, they're looking after the evaluations. And so gradually the facilitator is taking steps back until at the end of the year, the facilitators are no longer needed, and the relationships, lifelong relationships, really have been established.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You don't have to take our word for it. Our Fleming College student created a video for us.
We love, and you will not be able to unlearn what you do in a bridging team. You want to join a bridging team, I dare you to do it.
The highlight for the bridging team, I think, is the relationship.
It's definitely been watching this group of people come together and become a community of people who care for one another. I actually say who love one another.
It's, that whole love your neighbor thing, that's really what this was all about for me.
What has been the highlight for you in bridging teams?
I think getting to know people in poverty, who are living in poverty, in a very intense, fundamental way.
Just really building relationships and getting to know people. And I met people that I never ever would have been able to have an opportunity to meet because I didn't work here. I hadn't been active in a lot of groups. So the two mixtures of people coming together, it was just an opportunity to really meet and keep alive, like to learn to listen, I think.
Accept one another without judgment and support one another. And I think it's been across that class boundary that we rarely do cross unless we haven't. This has given us an opportunity to cross it.
So for me, I think the highlight is everyone that I've met here. The storytelling has just been amazing and moving, hearing everyone share their story. But making new friends from all walks of life. From the awesomes to the cools, and how this group spent so much time initially on trust building, and how cohesive and caring a group that we have become. I think that's just been amazing. I've been involved with all kinds of groups, but nothing has gelled the way this group came together and gelled, and how we care about each other. I would recommend this to anyone that thinks they'd like to be a mentor. It's been rewarding. I think I've learned as much from the awesome people, those people living in poverty. They've probably taught me more than I could ever teach them. I've admired them, their resiliency. Some of their stories have been so touching, and yet here they are, trying so hard to get ahead. And each and every one of them is delightful in their own way. And I just look forward to every Thursday and being with this wonderful group of people. So I'd advise it for anybody. Everyone has something to offer, and it's a two-way street. We give and we take, and it's a great opportunity to be a mentor.
Just being together, eating together, get opportunity if I hadn't joined the bridging team.
Middle class doesn't seem to understand people living in poverty. They understand a little bit, but not fully. So we kind of had to help them understand what poverty really is and how we live in poverty.
There's something lovely about giving.
So that video is, if you go to YouTube, Bedford House YouTube channel, you can find the full video. It's just 8 minutes long, so we just wanted to give you a taste of it.
Sure, we'll put a link to the full video on the landing page for the recording when we post the recording, so people can find it if they want to.
Yeah. So there's challenges. There's challenges. You've seen that saying there. And so there are rules around not judging, not fixing, not relating. But,
what do you mean by not relating? No relating?
Well, it's, you know, when you tell a story, right, when does it become like, oh, I know what you're talking about, for example, right? I was broke once, right? And so stopping people and getting that curiosity. We actually have another one of our mentors here with us.
Yeah, I just have a few questions here. I want to ask Lynn. Like, I've been a part of the bridging team and been to the meetings, and I like the lunches. But what I want to know is, when do I start getting to fix people? When I'm here to help people. When do I get to change lives?
You don't get to fix people, Reverend Alley Cat. You just don't get to fix people. You have to be open-hearted and listen. You have to come with curiosity and ask lots of questions.
Well, like, I just want to know, when are these people going to learn how to budget, for example?
How to budget. Okay, if you are a single person and you're living on $733 a month from Ontario Works and your bills are $1,000 a month, how do you suggest they budget?
Okay, yeah, that could be challenging. How about some goals? That's what everybody needs, is they just need some good goals.
Okay, you probably set goals. You probably set lots of goals, daily goals, yearly goals, all kinds of goals. Okay, but what if your goal was to have enough food to feed your family for the week, or enough just to pay off your overdue phone bill? What if that was your goal? Or to keep the landlord from evicting you? What if that was your goal? Aren't those good enough goals?
Well, that all sounds good, but, maybe what they just need is a job. Why can't people just get a job?
I don't remember the answer to that question. Go create some jobs, okay?
Well, I've been able to pull myself up by my bootstraps.
Alley Cat, you have no legs.
Oh, yeah.
You can't pull yourself up. I've lost my window. somewhere.
So we're just trying to illustrate, I guess, a couple things. One is we try to have a lot of fun. There's a lot of humor, but it is a challenge, especially for the mentors, to understand the mutuality that happens, right? And we are all keen to help and to solve problems and to fix things, but always from my own experience, right? And that's how I'm relating. And so to really, like what we are all learning is how to ask good questions, how to be curious, how not to make assumptions. So the middle class folks are the mentors. One of the things they discover is they might join to help people, but they soon discover that they're learning listening skills. They're learning how to ask good questions. They're learning life lessons. They're learning the value and the skill sets that people under-resourced folks are bringing. Yeah. So from these two groups, we've been developing a model. And we've been trying to come up with what are the core practices, what's key to making the magic happen, what's the recipe. And so like we've been saying, we've got these two models, and where we're at now is working on how can we train other people? How can we equip other people to start their own bridging teams? It's not rocket science. There are some essentials to it, but we feel that this is a model that people could make work in wherever they are in their own communities.
It has been, I just want to emphasize too, it's not a one-way street. Like, it's not that we've made these groups and, oh, the low-income people are just so helped or whatever. But it's a two-way street. And one lovely story we have is someone moved here from Toronto. She doesn't drive. She knew the transit system well in Toronto, but not in Peterborough. And so one of our awesome people was what the under-resourced people in the first group called themselves. So one of the awesome people took it upon herself to take her and show her how to, she needed her cell phone fixed or something, which buses to take to get down to the mall, and took her with her and explained it all the way in case she had to go back. And so it was just so lovely, because in Peterborough, there wouldn't be that many middle income earners who would use the bus system here. There just wouldn't be. And so it was just so lovely that she was able to help her. And there's so many stories about the back and forth between learning from one another. And that's one of the incredible gifts that this offers, is learning from one another. And the other is sitting in that room, and it is quite incredible to feel the love and care that's in the room, everyone for each other. One of our, the awesome people from the first group, he said his social life was his twin sister and his aunt who he lived with. That was it. That was all of everyone he knew here. And then and he's the one that said, we thought we were 5 of us and 10 of them. And we realized very shortly it was 15 of us. And that was such a powerful thing. And so he's all of a sudden, then he's got, instead of 2 people who know and care about him, now he's got 17 more people who know and care about him. And it's just such a powerful thing. It's so powerful.
So we're excited about it. We're passionate about it. And we're at a place now where we're working on, like I said, the model, and we want to share it. And so we have this next plan to scale out or replicate it here in Peterborough, or why not right across Canada? And so Lynn has been developing a manual and has created a 3-day workshop plus a year of online support for groups, for churches, for community groups, service clubs, who would host a team and train a couple of facilitators in this model. So we've developed the training, and we've come up with a price of just under $5,000 to train 2 facilitators and receive that online support. Just that amount just happens to be what you could apply to the Embracing the Spirit Fund in the United Church. So once again, let us do a little market testing here, and if you could, if that's something that you're curious about, maybe you could give us a yes, and or follow through with an email. But
just as people are responding to your question, Ellen, there's a question here from Cheryl. How would this work in a rural area where people know too much about each other to deepen their connection? Do you have any background on that?
Well, the second group that is running now is running at the Mount Community Center. And so during that journey, we realized that they did present some challenges, because there's a whole dynamic going on in the mountain. They have their, it's a little community in there. And so there were some issues, and it was challenging, but there was still some people who stuck it out, and been now taking the training to intern in the next. So yeah, in any situation, there will be challenges for sure. Yeah. And we're just learning as we go. And so that would be part of just dialogue and learn together.
Yeah, confidentiality
is super important.
Building that trust is one of those key ingredients. So, and a lot of the premise is that the different classes or cultures don't necessarily interact or socialize together. And I think that's, in my experience, that's true in rural communities as well as urban communities. Maybe people know each other, but they don't necessarily build those relationships of mutuality. And those are generalizations, right? So, yeah, there's challenges in any setting. So, we'd be curious about other takeaways or other comments or observations just about the team, our approach.
I should mention to you while people are typing those, Lynn and Ellen, that a couple of people said they might well be interested in your $5,000 course. So I would say to those folks, contact Bedford House email that's on the screen there, and let them know, ask for follow-up information. That's a significant commitment, and there may well be people who watch the recording who would want to do that too. So I don't think there's any point in just taking down names right now, because we won't capture anybody on the recording. But there's the email, and by all means make contact with Alan and Lynn about that.
Great. So we have this, and this is, speaking of financials, this is represents the people that have helped us to create the model. So significant support from the United Church of Canada, the Foundation and Mission and Service Fund, and our local region, formerly Bay of Quinte Conference, and the Embracing the Spirit Fund. Also, we got support from an American Deaconess community, Kathleen Donnelly Foundation. Here at home, the City of Peterborough has supported us. The Peterborough Community Foundation and the Peterborough Foundation, Community Foundation. We just received a seed grant to develop this model, the training program, from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and the Innoweave program. We did a strategic planning exercise with them. So just in the last we're moving into the last 10 minutes here. And this is, so we wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about the reflection, where this journey has taken us and how we hope to change the conversation about poverty in Canada. We're saying typically what happens when we talk about poverty, we focus on the victims, we focus on the people as the problem, or we blame politicians that politicians aren't picking it up, and we blame the system, right? It's this welfare system. But what if we change the conversation and talked instead about how we've failed to redistribute wealth in Canada, how we've failed to create systems where all of those resources are redistributed. And so changing the conversation from fixing the poor to getting imaginative and creative about how do we share the gifts and skills in a community. So yeah, we're calling it from fixing the poor to, and we're still struggling to get this conversation right, but to how to reimagine, how to redistribute community resources in ways that are equitable and mutually beneficial. The gift economy, we've seen it happening. All kinds of small examples of people sharing resources, building community, helping each other out in all kinds of small ways. Right? Mm-hmm. So our latest experiment has been to gather this group of storytellers. And these are all people who have lived experience in poverty. And we're actually paying them for their expertise. They are consultants. We pay them $17.50 an hour. This is a living wage in Peterborough. And we're gathering stories and their creative ideas about redistributing resources. I'm sure many of you would have ideas or experiences with what gifts, what skills, what resources do low-income, under-resourced people bring? Mm-hmm. You know, would you like to add some of those to the chat? We have stories.
Yeah, we have a few minutes, so feel free, folks, put your stories in the chat. Complication, of course, is that if they type more than 5 words, it takes a couple of minutes to get it all out.
Yeah, that's true.
We don't see anything until they push enter, so we have to give them enough space to do that.
Lynn told the story about the bus. We have another mentor who's hired one of the people to help her organize her home around downsizing. There's expertise about anyone interested in living more lightly on the planet. There might be some expertise offered from folks who are living more lightly on the planet.
Well, and Brenda points out, if under-resourced people don't have jobs, they may have time to share, which is an important resource that we don't always take account of, I think. Yeah. John says one of the main sources for poverty in our little community stem from generational poverty. So much hopelessness in our youth who've lived all of their life being dependent, more than 35.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know, a lot of, you know, some of our storyteller catalysts are artists. And many artists are living well below the poverty line. And so they bring their art into the community. And
Brenda's talking about a kind of mutual sharing of tasks. She buys groceries for someone and that person helps her with snow clearing and housework.
Right. Yeah. 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 We just traded an awning that we weren't using, like an overhead awning, for to our neighbor who works at a bike shop. And so I'm going to, once the snow clears, I'm going to get a new bike, or a secondhand bike, reconditioned bike from him. You know, that bartering, right?
Still questions coming up about how this works in a rural area, and whether there are differences there.
Yeah.
It's a good question. It is a good question, because sometimes there's transportation issues in the rural areas, and so yeah, it would present different challenges there for sure.
Mm-hmm. Lynn's been doing some training in the city of Kawartha Lakes, along with Debbie Sherwin, who I know is online with us today. And those are a lot of smaller rural areas. Even just gathering people, even just delivering the training is a challenge. How do you get people together across distances? Yeah.
I noticed there's different questions that have scrolled through that we haven't been able to answer. So if you want to email us, we'll do our best to answer your questions. Also, if you're at all in the Peterborough area, a couple things we can offer you is there is the all-day workshop this Saturday. We'd need to know as soon as possible if you want to take part in that. But also the first Wednesday of every month, we do what's called a neighbors network. It begins with dinner. And it's a gathering, and so it gives you kind of a taste of what a bridging team is like. It's not the same thing, but it's a gathering of people from all the different classes, and it's really been pretty amazing as well.
Mm-hmm. There's so much information, right? And you know, even in the one-day workshop, there's a ton of information, hard to cover. So that's why we've created these neighbor network gatherings as a bit of a icebreaker. It's hard to describe, you know, the magic that happens at a bridging team, and so, you know, it's kind of you need to experience it. You know, the fun and the welcome and the trust building and the icebreakers. You know, icebreakers are so important. So, you know, because I say we all feel equally uncomfortable. And so, you know, those pieces are really experiential, right? And hard to deliver on paper.
What do you want? We got 5 minutes left. Do you want to do takeaways again? Your takeaway?
Yeah.
What's your takeaway?
Yeah.
Sure. What's the first thing you will take away? What will you do today or tomorrow? What's the thing you'd love to do, or that jumps out at you as being the low-hanging fruit? Couple of comments here in the list just while you're typing. Doreen's talking about a Housing First project supports move-ins with basic supplies, beds, bedding, kitchen supplies, and so on. And Barbara's acknowledging that too. My sense that is what you're talking about, Lynn and Alan, really is so founded in relationship, that it's not doing for, but it's doing with. It's a very different approach.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And you know, it's not an agency approach, whereas so many programs are 6 weeks or 10 weeks or 16 weeks, you know, and then so there's the support that's there. So many folks have been through program after program after program, but by engaging volunteers, you know, passionate amateurs, there's the ability to sustain support over the long term, right? Lynn's story, you know, that walk she took, it took her 7 years to transition. And so the importance of building those relationships that can walk with people over the long time that it takes to shift gears, right? And to set goals and to make changes. Yeah.
Some of the takeaways that are coming up in the chat here, Pat's drawing connections with the Bear Clan Patrol in Manitoba. Annette's talking about wanting to share the story with others. Julie is just wanting to learn more about poverty. Thinking, Cheryl says, I'm thinking about who I would work with as a facilitator, because this is certainly not a project to take on by yourself. I think that's really important, Cheryl.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hillary is acknowledging how the many dimensions of poverty beyond the financials have an impact on people's lives.
Absolutely.
And Jordan's just acknowledging how much this is life-changing for everybody who's involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doreen's wondering whether she ought to sponsor some pre-training classes for some volunteers before working together. Interesting thought. And Brenda's wondering about the unspoken rules she has, and whether they're something she wants to continue or change.
Yeah.
Helpful takeaways, fascinating. Isn't it neat how you kind of connect with what people are already doing and prod them to go deeper?
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about learning. That's what we love about it. We're learning continually.
Well, and it's really clear the audience here today are folks who already deeply care about these things. So you've helped them think about the work that they're doing. And even if they don't end up running a program that's identical to yours, it will change what they're doing in their own situations too, which is what this is all about. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. There are so many of you from different parts of the country, and I found it inspiring just to get a sense of the work that so many different places are doing around poverty in their communities. This is what the church is for. This is why we're here, to make a difference in our own lives and in the world. And so thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. And thank you, Alan and Lynn, for sharing some of the work that you do and for prodding us all to think a little deeper about these things. Alan and Lynn, stay on the line and we'll just go into a private room and debrief together for a couple of minutes. But to the rest of you, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for the ministry you offer, and blessings on all of that. Bye for now.